how do I move forward and make the best of it, and try to focus on that end goal more than how much I needed to change to get to that end goal. What does that person look like who is successful? What would they do? It's not what I would do. What would they do?
Welcome back, everyone, to the InvestHER Podcast. This is Liz Faircloth.
And I am your co-host, Andressa Gdelli.
So you can read books, take all the courses you want, make the mistakes on your own, or you can learn from a real estate investor who's been there and done that. And that's exactly what today's episode is about.
We have Sunitha Rao. She's a former Olympian who turned to a successful real estate investor. She's going to talk about her best and her worst creative financing deal. Stay tuned. So Sunitha, you are a former Olympian, and many people, when they're transitioning from their first career to their second career or third career, they think that they are starting from zero all over again. And we always encourage people to evaluate and be aware of the skills that made you a very successful athlete. So for you, what are the skills that you brought to the table that shaped your success in real estate?
That's a really great question. And I totally agree. Starting over can be so scary because you are essentially, it feels like you're at base level, but it is the things that you've learned that help you be successful in other areas, and even the things that have maybe held you back from success in other areas that can really help you catapult and move away from that kind of zero base start. So for me, it came down to the intangible. So being an athlete, one of the massive things that I learned at a very young age was delaying gratification and working really hard and really believing in the long-term vision. And I don't know what is more valuable to building a real estate career beyond these three things, because we've heard it so many times. Real estate is not a get rich quick kind of strategy. It takes years and there are a lot of setbacks. But at the same time, if you believe in that vision, if you've done the research, done the due diligence, you know what you're doing, you've built your network, as long as you keep believing in it, as long as you keep working hard and knowing that the gratification will come in its full capacity down the road, those are the things that will really, I think, help all new investors. And those are the things that saved my life. Because there were times it was so challenging. I was doing this on my own, just like trying to piece together like dollars and like cents that were left over from my day job. I was like couponing and doing all these ridiculous things at the very beginning to come up with like my seed capital. And, the long-term belief, the first couple of years were really hard, but now 5-6 years in, my life is so different because I just kept believing in what I'd learned and what I'd seen.
Yeah. So important, right? Quick story. My son wants to sell Pokemon cards on the internet, right? And he wants to do this before he goes to camp. And I think we scanned in 3 cards this morning. And he's like, I want to do 200 cards. I said, honey, baby steps here. Delayed gratification. There's a little bit of that delay. They don't understand. He's 10, right? So he doesn't get delayed gratification yet. I said, we took a step. He's like, well, I wanted to get all 200 done. And that's what really investing is all about, right? I love that delayed gratification. So we want to jump into creative financing. It is something that a lot of women are not struggling with, but navigating because they're trying to get deals done in this, current economy, and they need different tools in the toolbox. So we want to dive into your best and worst deals from a creative financing perspective, and we're going to dissect them. We love dissecting things. So let's start. What do you think, Andressa? Have some fun. Let's go with the worst one first. I think that was more intriguing.
We were like, the worst one.
Let's go with the blood first. Okay. So this was my first seller financing deal. I was a brand new investor and I was just like hungry. This was like 2019. And this is when there were so many bids for like every property. Everyone's like, the market's getting hot. It's getting too hot, this, that. And I was like, oh my God, my time is running out. I just started. Like, I'm never going to get a deal. So that kind of is what led to a little bit of the desperation and some of the things I agreed to with this deal. It's so funny because like Today, if these specific characteristics in a seller financing situation came up, I probably would not do the deal because I know the other side and what can go wrong. And I always try to like protect my downside first. That is number one. And so, while all those characteristics were there, it also kind of ended up being like monetarily 6 years later, an amazing deal, but I almost lost it. So what happened was with this specific deal, it was like a package purchase. And so the wholesalers were selling this beautiful duplex in this part of town that I absolutely loved. My first property I purchased in that part of town, and this is my second purchase. And I was like, I can't find stuff in this part of town at this price point. This is amazing. And my agent was like, well, they also have the single family. And I was like, I don't have money for both. I don't know what you want from me. I'll close the deal. I'll figure it out. But like, I can't conventionally finance both. And he was like, well, I know these guys. I've worked with them for a long time. They're good for their word. If you buy and fully finance the duplex, the bigger property, they will sell or finance the smaller duplex. And essentially the purchase of the big one would act as kind of like the security in their mind or the down payment for the second one. And I was like, okay, cool, great. And so, we ended up seller financing it. However, the two things that I struggled with were the terms of their seller financing, agreement. First, I had a hard time understanding it even when I got it reviewed by a lawyer. And that is not something I would do now. I'd make sure I thoroughly understand each and every part of it because one of the terms said that they would hold on to the deed. And so the problem with that is that when the buyer doesn't have the deed, there is no opportunity typically to refinance, A, and B, while they still hold the deed, like anything can happen. They can come take it back. They can make their own improvements to the property because technically they still kind of own it. Like there's just too much gray matter, and our contract I wouldn't say it wasn't detail oriented enough. I was not assertive enough to hash out all these what ifs. Push came to shove. I ended up signing the documents. And then, so there wasn't like a payback period on that contract. But then 5 months later, they were like, we want our money. And I was like, I've been making payments. What do you mean? And they were like, well, we want to cash out on this and put the money elsewhere, which totally makes sense. But that wasn't part of our agreement. And they wanted it done within a month or 90 days. And I was still like a brand new investor. You know, I'd only been been in the business for like a year. I didn't know how to make this work. And I was like, oh, well, it looks like I might lose this property, but I'm really going to try not to, you know? And so most banks, like they wanted me to refinance and come up with the money, but I couldn't come at that time. I could not come up with $60,000 that you might as well have been asking me to come up with 2 million at that point, you know? And, luckily, I was able to connect with a credit union, a local credit union, where they basically make their own rules, have their own portfolio of funds where they can invest in properties. And I had enough connections and people to vouch for me where they were like, okay, we can make this work with you, you know? And so I ended up being able to refinance and get that money and keep holding on to that property, which was great because even though like I didn't put a ton of money in for rehab and didn't need it, I still put money in. So I would have been at a loss on that property if I hadn't been able to execute, you know? And, now that I have been able to execute that, and I still hold on to that property, it's been a great little asset, in an area that's developing, you know, all of that fun stuff. But, if I were to do this deal again, there's no way I would do it because I fronted money for the acquisition. I fronted money for the rehab. I like put in the time to get it.
Specifically, what would you have done differently if you were doing that deal again?
I would have held on to the deed. If the deed is not in my name and I don't have an easy like exit option, I would not do it. And there's also, when you don't hold on to the deed, obviously, like they have ownership, they have more say, they can do things for which I would have no recourse. And so unless I own the property, unless it is 100% in my name, unless I have 100% of the say in it, both like monetarily and legally, I am not doing it.
And let's say you have a seller that it's like set in stone Am I using this correctly, Liz?
Yes, you are. Set in stone. Good job. Proud of you. All that tutoring's been helping.
I'm becoming the crop of the crop.
The crop of the crop. Yep. Crop of the crop.
So when you have a seller that really wants to hold the deed, how would you enroll? Not convince, but how would you enroll that it is a benefit for them and for you that you are the one holding the deed?
That's a really great question. So I would also think about it from their perspective. So I have the right, just like they have the right to do things to the property, I also would have the right to do things to the property. And so essentially I could devalue it. I mean, you frankly do have some landlords who don't take good care of the property and that sort of thing. And I could take those actions and they could end up with an asset that is worth less than what they have now. And so I think having the deed in the buyer's name really helps to have skin in the game, So that is the way I would sell it. Like it would be mine. I would take care of it as if it was my own asset, because guess what? It is my own asset now. It's not something where I can be like, this sounds like a great idea. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, I'm going to back out and you can take it back. Like it's still yours. It's not technically mine. Have fun, So I think any course of action that is taken, it is best to have full skin in the game.
And just to mention, I wrote these two words down: owning versus controlling. And so for you, because sometimes people may own a property, they're not in control of the property. And I think we mitigate risk when we're more in control of what we're doing. And so that's very powerful, right? Because certain things you can't control, for certain things you can. Even as an LP, passive investor, active investor, it's shocking. Like, oh, I own this property, but by percent, they don't control it, right? They don't control the decision. So just, I want everyone to hear that as you're reviewing deals and looking at creative opportunities. Where's owning? Where's controlling? And so that's a big one. So if you had to do it over again, that's one piece. I'm curious about the person that said, no, trust these people. They're good people. I'm curious what you learned from that, because that was a influence. And I'm curious, if you had to do that over, not that I'm telling you should have done that over, but was there a learning in that I'm sure there was. And what was it for you? Because certain personalities listening, we do take people's opinions. Oh, they're good people. I'm just as screw that. I would never even listen to someone. That doesn't even matter.
I don't care.
Influence,
like the Jones effect, right? That's a selling thing when you say, oh, so-and-so bought it. So-and-so liked it. So-and-so gave the review up. Could care less about that.
But when you're new to not just real estate, but when you're new to a strategy, we do end up relying on people who can confidently say something. That's not hard to understand. So what was a learning there for you? Or was there one?
Oh, there definitely was one. I think at the end of the day, so I equate this to when investors come, when they're new and they're like, what should I do? And they'll ask a more experienced investor, what should I do? That's a great question. And it's always important to have feedback, but it's also important to remember at the end of the day, no one else faces the consequences for their biased opinions. Only you as the investor will face the consequences, both good and bad. Consequences typically has a negative connotation, but whatever comes of your decision, only you will be impacted by it, typically. So that is something that's truly important to remember and be like, does this really align with what I want? And I mean, I was influenced then, but also I think this is part of the problem. I think some of that influence was because I wanted to be influenced, because it was so hard to find deals. And I found the deal I wanted in the area I wanted. It was just so perfect. And I was like, I need this. And I let that outweigh kind of better critical judgment. Thankfully, it worked out in the end, but I would not do that again. And the lesson that I learned from that, I did apply to future deals, maybe a little bit excessively, because as I move forward, I did start to work with private lenders, et cetera. And caveat, I'm very good to my private lenders. Their returns are always higher than what I promised, faster than what I promised. But my thing is that they are always debt lenders, so they get the interest rate. They don't get equity, because once they have equity, then I feel like they are in it for the longer term and they have more of a say. So it's a debt lender with a payoff period. So then I can refinance, do what I need to do, get them the money. And then it is all in my ownership and all in my control 1,000%. And even when they're in the deal, it's still in my control. I became very selective with who I worked with. They had to implicitly just trust me. And that is a big ask for a lot of money. But that's just kind of after the stress of that and me realizing what could have gone wrong, it is simply not worth me doing a deal where things could go wrong or there's additional stress with the interpersonal stuff.
I just want to emphasize, because I think there's a natural way of being, right? When I got started, I rely on other people's expertise and the pressure to really, I really need to get a deal going so I can really claim the title of being an investor, right? Versus, well, I need to get the right deal and so I can do it. But I think there's a lot of pressure right now with the market, with interest rate. Well, if I am not doing deals, that means I'm not an investor anymore, or I have to do this, or I have to do that. So one thing that I recommend people, like you can rely on people's opinion, but you need to really understand who is this person to you, in reference to you. What is your relationship with that person? If my neighbor who is a blue collar, if I get advice from him, I'm just going to be sitting on my porch and just watching the cars pass by, right? So who we getting advice from? And sometimes we're getting from ourselves only. And that is a big, big trap. And that's why we created investor community, where you can rely on other people. We have a lot of experienced women inside our community that you can bounce ideas and say, hey, this is what's going on here. Should I go there? Should I go this way? What are the pros? What are the cons? Because it's priceless, right? What you were saying about the deed, you wouldn't do it again. So now if I am somebody that is considering that, I was like, wait a minute. She just said that, and I just heard that on the podcast. Let me ask further questions to my attorney, to my team, or whoever I'm working with to fully understand. And when people say to me, are there good people? What does that even mean, right? What the hell does that even mean?
There's morally good. And then there's also good in terms of aligned with your biases and needs and understanding, because everyone's opinion comes from their own perspective. Everyone's perspective is skewed based upon their fears goals, and their goals.
Right? And yes, it all has to be aligned.
Exactly.
So let's talk about your best deal, creative financing wise.
So these days, actually, I think it was probably my most recent deal, because I was so proud of that one. So proud.
I love you. You're like, my worst deal was when I started. My best deal was last week. I like your confidence there, girlfriend. I like that confidence.
It's going up. Great. How bad would it be? My greatest deal was when I got started 10 years ago. My worst last week got repositioned, foreclosed.
Yeah. So this deal I was super proud of, because my risk tolerance is, I don't have the highest tolerance for risk, which is why I have grown, air quotations, I think a little bit smaller or a little bit slower than other investors, but that's what works for me. And so that helps keep me sane. So one of those areas in which my risk tolerance impacted my decision making was the source where I purchased properties. And so I really struggled with wholesalers, because you have to make decisions so fast. You don't have an inspection contingency, which I swear by, and there's all these things that move more quickly. But, and it's also it feels like, if it's on the MLS, obviously there are other investors bidding on it, on the property. But when you're wholesaling, it's there's almost a little bit of a pride identity thing. That it's all other investors, other savvy people, is your assumption. You're like, okay, am I better than these other savvy people? Am I the savviest? Let me be the savviest. You know what I mean? So, that was actually the first deal I purchased from like an outside wholesaler that that I wasn't already friends with, didn't have that like trust built, all of that. And, I call that one creative financing because over the years, so I've paid off 2 of my properties and I've done a lot of house hacking. Each time I house hack, I make sure I get into the property that when it's under market and I do as much as I can to really like boost that value while I'm still living in it. Then I get a HELOC, a primary residence HELOC on the property. Move to the next one, rinse and repeat. So by the time like end of last year came around, I had the line of credit for my paid off properties, and I had several HELOCs from the homes I lived in, which allowed me to finance my own deals as a cash buyer without using a private lender who I would also have to pay points, who I'd have to negotiate with, who I'd have to call on daylight, hope they pick up. They aren't having a super busy day and they have the funds liquid and available, all of that stuff, And so, I've built this up so I didn't have to deal with that hassle. And so I was finally at the point where I could just be like, all right, I have this little, like this nest egg that I can use to like, just like be my own cash buyer. Look at me. I'm a badass. I have cash, And so, this property popped up back in the suburbs where the first 2 deals I did, actually, it was in the same area. I have not been able to get back into that suburb since 2019 because people started to like recognize that it was an area of value, this and that. And it would just be like the properties would sell for these ridiculous prices where it wouldn't necessarily like cash flow if you had leverage on it. So then this property popped up and I was like, this is right in my wheelhouse. This is awesome. I went out, looked at it, no inspection contingency, but thankfully like I had contractors who had really good relationships.
What type of property was that though?
It was a duplex. I think built in like the 50s or 60s, like stone facade, like ranch style, 1-story, squat, but like pretty solid, And so like I was able to make all these calls. And even though I didn't have the contingencies, I had the relationships to where I could get people in and have them like check out the property, give me the red light, green light, because by that time, like they knew what I needed. And they knew that if they gave me a property that was like a total mess, I would be calling on them later to like fix it. And it would be like a massive headache for them too. So, so all of that happened. I was able to close. So I actually also wasn't even the highest bid on it. I bid just above asking. There was someone else who bid higher than me, but they couldn't access the funds quickly enough and close. Whereas since I already had the cash sitting in HELOCs, I just had to call my banker and be like, move it to the checking account. Done. And so I actually lost the bid initially. They came back to me 2 days later and they're like, when can you close? Can you close in a week? And I was like, what? I guess so. Yes, I can. I'm going to figure out how to close in a week. And so then I called on the relationships I had and had them all in there in the next 3 days, checking everything out, move the money around. And like a week later, I was able to close. And so that's probably the deal that I am like happiest about and most proud of, because like it was just pretty cool to be able to see the culmination of years of work come together in this asset.
That's
this
great.
acquisition.
And each step that moved you towards that. I'm curious though, with a HELOC, now, was this a value add? Was this like a classic BRRRR where you're going to replace the HELOC money? Okay.
Absolutely,
because then the question becomes, right? Because I have a HELOC. We're actually increasing our HELOC. And I think a lot of women listening are considering utilizing their HELOC, but they have to hedge. Okay. It's costing me 6%, 7%, 8%, right? Hard to put that in a private money deal if you're only getting 8%, 9%, 10%. So you have to put it into something that yields the return in a time frame that works for you, right? That's what you're hedging all the time. So for you use that and put it back. So that kind of then it cost you, and then you put kind of like a line of credit versus it's staying in the deal for long term. Because technically you could have done that, but it would have cost you more.
I mean, technically it could have, but also you have to look at the terms of the HELOC. So like on the HELOCs from a primary residence, I don't know if it's like this for all lines of credit. Like those have like 10-year terms or whatever. But for my paid off properties, those have 1 to 2 year terms. So I need to replenish that money between 1 to 2 years. So you need to really look at, and you can also, if you, I go to the same bank for all of these HELOCs. It's actually the bank that refinanced that first seller finance purchase years ago.
The credit union.
And so I know they exactly.
You're great.
So yeah. And so I know they have flexibility and I know they'll work with me. That's why I keep doing business with them. And so you have to really look at those terms. So I could stay in it for longer, but I can't stay in it for that long because the business line of credit term will come to fruition and then I need to pay them back at that point.
It makes sense. And you mentioned the relationship at the first deal and then now the relationships right now. A lot of women, even though they are becoming more and more successful, they still lack the confidence into really trusting themselves and pulling the trigger on certain things. What do you think it contribute for you to really like, yeah, I'm badass. I'm going to make this work.
I feel badass sometimes, but not always. And I think I struggle with that too. I mean, I was raised in an Indian household and I was very much raised to be compliant. Being assertive and confident were not the values that were important. And if anything, that was actually more kind of like the goal was to like beat that out of me, And so like I had to be like a good girl. And you know what? Like being those qualities of compliance and being air quotations good don't always relate well to the business world, like because it's really hard to vouch for yourself. But what helped me over time kind of overcome that is if I don't vouch for myself, no one will. And it was the fear of staying in that same place where I was, which clearly was not something that worked for me if I was willing to look into real estate investing, look into something that was so far beyond my risk tolerance. No one in my family, people I was close to, like no one really did that. It was like so new and like I'd come from like years of not having any money to the point where like sometimes when I was a teenager, like didn't know how I was going to put like food on my table and stuff. So like to get this money together to work so hard for it and then be like, I'm going to put it in a house, or into something else. Like it was a huge risk to take. And if I don't advocate for myself, I could lose all of it and I could stay exactly where I am. And that was not the option. So like, that was what I focused on. Like, how do I move forward and make the best of it and try to focus on that end goal more than how much I needed to change to get to that end goal. Like, what does that person look like who is successful? What would they do? It's not what I would do. What would they do? They would say, okay, this is right. This is wrong. This doesn't look right. I'm going to hold that person accountable, etc. And it is hard. It is still hard because like sometimes my contract will do something and I'll be like, I mean, is that really the best choice? When I'm full well knowing it is not, but yeah, it's just like little steps and little decisions where you constantly have to like lean into it.
Liz and I really love this book called Radical
I was
Compassion.
thinking the same exact thing. I really think you and I are spending way too much time together. Like one mind. But go on. Sorry. I interrupted right when you said the book.
So Radical Compassion, it's a very interesting book that taps into encouraging us to talk to our future self. So it's a meditation and you go through it. And it's really powerful because many times we are relying on different types of relationships, mentors, and we also need to rely on our future self for guidance because many times that person already exists. And we are aiming to be as close as possible to that individual. I think 2011, when I did that for the first time with a Tony Robbins coach, I did the meditation and I saw myself on stage. And then I opened my eyes like, I got it wrong. Like, what the hell? Stage? I barely speak English. What am I going to be on fucking stage? To do what? Like, what are you talking about? Right? Guess what? Freaking stage, right? So the point is like, and then when I see my future self right now, I really like that person. And I'm aiming to be that person. And I do ask for guidance from that person. So I think that what you're saying is so aligned. We don't need to make decisions based on the person that we are right now. We need to make the decisions and aim for as if we are already our future self, what my future self would do in this case right now, how my future self would behave and handle this situation right now. Then we put ourselves, I think that would kind of like, we take a step out of our own body and look at the situation from a more non-emotional way, right? And that has been super, super powerful for me personally. I know, Liz, you with your I'll share something. Can I share that?
You share. I love Andressa because I'm telling her about my future self, what she looks like, and I'm just like, nope, I don't think so. I don't think that's what your future self looks like. I'm like,
That's
it's not your future self.
No.
Jeez.
I was like, that's no. Liz sees her future self with long white hair. I was
Long
like, no,
gray
that's
hair.
not happening. I am not going to allow you.
She's lovely.
Like,
she's like 95 and has like hair down to her butt.
Hell freaking no.
No question.
She does not.
Okay, but I love like the silver fox look. I really like
I'm not into it right now, but my 95 self does.
You're not gonna be like,
it's like breezes in the wind. It's this lovely, lovely woman, and she's just so like calm, but like, connected to the world, like
in a farm,
Zen woman
in a farm.
But I love that. Not to get too crazy. Everyone's like, whoa, what are we listening to? But it's about like, really about like who our future self is. And then tapping into that woman, not just for decisions, but to get what we deserve. Because I think that's really the key. We kind of like have this instinct. You have that instinct, right, Sunitha? Like, I know I deserve this. I know I deserve that. But it's almost like a permission to not only think about it, but permission to ask for it. And when we have this like backing of ourselves with wonderfully grayed hair, we have this permission. And not that we need permission, but I do think there's a transition. And it's even ourselves giving ourselves permission, not from anyone else, not to be the good girl or be compliant, but to be our best self and to really get what we deserve, because we deserve the best, So I love that you did that. And yeah, radical compassion. Andressa and I both read that, and we will have her on stage. We want to get her to an InvestHER Con as well, the author of that book. But Sunitha, this has been great. Where can everyone listening learn more about you?
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, so I have a website, but I would say the place that I check the most, where it's easiest to connect with me, is my Instagram. So that is SUNI_RAO_, my first name, my last name, punctuated by underscores.
Awesome. All the information you guys can find on our show notes. Sunitha, thank you so much for coming here and sharing all your wisdom and inspiration with our listeners. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
Thank you so much.